Okay, so interesting and important and weighty topic: heart transplants in halacha. So the truth is that there are different ways we can go about studying this subject in general, but any subject really, especially this one. One way to do it is, if I were giving a lecture in a lecture hall, collate all the information and make a presentation on all the information. But as has been the what's the word? The format of the way we learn here is we're learning chuvas, we're learning responses. So it's going to be text-based, as it always is. Now, when you're doing text-based, obviously you become limited. We can't read all the literature on the subject. We would be here forever if we went through all the literature. So I figured what we'll do is we'll have a sample from both sides of the spectrum. So you have the most restrictive and the most permissive, right? I don't know that it's going to be the most permissive, but it's rather permissive and then rather restrictive. So that way we get the contrast. So when doing that, I went through quite a bit of them and try to find, there's two criteria that I was looking for when I'm looking for sample texts from both sides of the perspective. One is that it's lucid, it's easy to read and flows well, so it's easy for us to read the text. And the other is that it covers a broad array of questions that might arise that would be discussed by some other texts and things. So to that end, I have this text in front of us, and we're starting with this one. The one we're starting with is from Rabbi Yehuda Gershoni. As I mentioned, was known as the Iloi of Goronda, which is a city in Belarus. He was the prodigy of that prodigy, thank you, of that town. He later became a student of Rabbi Avram Yitzhak Kook, famous Rabbi Kook. Rabbi Kook is in some ways the mastermind and the leader, the founder of the religious Zionist movement. And Rabbi Gershoni is in that camp, if you will, and emerged as quite a leader. He even founded a yeshiva in New York, and moved back to Israel, wrote quite a bit. Very productive life in terms of Torah academia. And he writes this responsa / article in a Torah journal called Shvilin, which, to the best of my knowledge, was a publication of the chief rabbinate in Jerusalem. They hosted a platform for these scholars to write their ideas. So he's writing it here. Now, because he's writing it as an article rather than an ordinary responsa, so it gives us that lucidity, and it gives us the broad nature of it, because he's going to give us a well-rounded sort of view. But well-rounded in the sense that it's going to be well-rounded from the classic texts. He's not going to be citing to his contemporaries and what they say. We, as in if Rabbi today were to rule on a case of heart transplant, he would not only cite to the classic texts, he would cite to the contemporary texts who interpret the classic text and what their conclusions are, right? But this article gives us an insight into the classic text from which the contemporary texts are deriving their ideas from, which is why this article serves as a good starting point to really get a good understanding of what the issues are and what classic text would you be relying on. Because obviously, when I say classic text, we're talking about Mishnah, Gemara, Rambam, written at a minimum of 6, 7, 8, 9, 1,000 years ago. They didn't have heart transplants then, right?
So yeah. My question is, why do we have how is it that we now develop what we call modern? Because it exists before, or because we didn't have the
So heart transplants didn't exist so I'm not sure how long ago. So you have to look at the texts and try to deduce what they would have said based on what they write. That's right. That's correct. So what they say about the end of life, the moment of the end of life, and things of that nature, and that'll help us get clarity on what they might have said if they were to be faced with the issue of heart transplant. So that's why this article serves very well as a good starting point, because he's going to go through all the classic texts, and we're going to get a good understanding of what any of the contemporary scholars today would have cited to, or what they do cite to, even though we're not going to be reading all the contemporary texts. Now, because he does this in such a broad sense, he's rather permissive. In fact, I've seen in a number of other essays on the subject that he is cited as one who permits it, Rabbi Gershoni, even though I don't see it explicitly, but it's quite implicit that he's leaning towards permissibility. Whereas the next article we're going to read, the next Shuvah, from the Tzitz as Rabbi Waldenberg, who we learned from in the last subject on cosmetic surgery, he's very restrictive. He forbids it, and his will be written also very lucid, as we saw last time. He writes very lucidly and gives us a well-rounded understanding, which is why I chose him rather than some of the other responses that are restrictive, that forbade the activity. But Rabbi Waldenberg is very well grounded, and he speaks directly to the situation rather than an article about it. Right. So it's going to be two different perspectives. Yes, this is generally where we're going. We're clear. So let's begin. So the introduction is very good because he frames for us what are the questions at hand. So we're looking at this page, the Hebrew one. That's the article written by Rabbi Gershoni in this Torah journal called Shvilin. So he writes, Eretz Yisrael and in Israel, in the diaspora outside of Israel, is the question arises halacha l'maisa, and it has practical ramification. Bashtolas halev, with respect to the question of heart transplant, that's what hashtolas halev means. L'chola, for a person who's sick, misukan, and the person who is sick is in danger. Shalo yochal lichyos, a person cannot live without this procedure, that is the transplant. Now, kavanasi, my intention here, says Rabbi Gershoni, Levar, to explain, Mekodesh halacha, the sources of the law, that's what I was referring to, the classic texts, al hasfekas, on the various different doubts, benegea, that might arise, l'shayla chamurazu, for this very difficult and serious question. Hashayla mischalekas la'nafim, the question can be divided into various different branches, and he's going to put 4 different windows that we have to address. Aleph, question number 1. Mosai nechsha ben adam lemes, lefi dinei Yisrael. At what moment is a person considered dead by Jewish law? Haroifim bismanenu, doctors in our day, einim yoidim lekfoya zos b'diuk, they don't know how to determine this exactly. V'oimrim, and they say, sheprotses zeh, this process nimshach is still ongoing. So I don't know how long ago this is written and whether the process is still ongoing.
Process of what?
Determining what the exact moment of death is. I don't know if it's still ongoing. Maybe you can tell us. I think it is, because
I think the idea of the brain is that.
right. Yeah. So there. Okay. So this is going to come up a little bit more in the next essay. But I think the reason why he said the process is still ongoing is because even in medical terms, you have death and then you have clinical death, and they're not the same thing.
And brain dead.
And brain dead is clinically dead, which we're going to see in the next essay more, where he's restrictive. He's going to talk about that a bit, and I think that's why he means that the process is ongoing. But before we go forward, and this is, I think, something that Rabbi Gershoni was remiss in missing, is that he doesn't make the following important note, which is, he says it here very briefly, but not, yes, to me, it would seem like he should have highlighted this a little bit more, as I've seen it highlighted in some of the other essays. Yeah, but it doesn't matter.
No, I'm just saying, no, because the people don't.
Yeah, it's being recorded. Yeah. So, this was the point I wanted to make, which is that he says here we have to determine what's the moment of death by Jewish law. Now, why is that necessary? It's necessary because, as I read in a different article, which articulates this very well, which is the process of medical discovery, medical learning, is to collect data, right? And then when they collect the data, they make a determinism based on the data they collected. Yeah. Now, the determination that a doctor might make based on the data collected is not necessarily the same determination that halacha would make with the very same data. Following? So even if the medical community comes to the conclusion definitively that this is the moment of death, it does not mean that halacha will have to concede to that. Halacha will take the same data that they are collecting to come to that determination and make its own determination. Following? In other words, if doctors are collecting data on when people are alive and when they are dead, and what moment they start to lose consciousness, and what moment they stop to breathe, and what moment their heart stops, and what moment all that, and then they decide arbitrarily, so to speak, that we're going to make the determination that this is the moment of death, halacha might take the same data and say, sorry, it's a different moment. Following? So it's important that we understand that it's not that the doctor is lying by telling you the moment of death is different than what halacha is. It just means observing the same data, halacha and medicine come to different determination. And it has to be very clear that we understand this, but because I'm sure people are going to hear this and say, but my doctor said he's still alive until this. My doctor said he's already dead. Your doctor is right, citing the determination of medicine. But the same data could come to a different determination. And halacha might have a different determination, a different definition, right? So it's clear we have to understand then where halacha defines the moment of death, given the data we know, right? And not just what the doctors say. Following, is that clear? It's not an indictment of doctors. It just means that we don't necessarily have the same rubric to come to the determination. Following?
Yeah,
okay.
The things are very, very flagrant.
Yeah, Pastor Seltzer.
Hitting me in the head. You have to buy into the other arguments that one or the other.
What do you
You're
mean?
in this camp, you'll buy in this argument. That camp, you'll buy that argument.
Well, okay. Well,
But that's all.
the objective of our class is to come to the halachic understanding, right? So the premise is we're accepting halacha, or even if you're not accepting halacha, that it will still remain that this is halacha's determination. Whether you decide that,
right?
Whether you just decide to subscribe to halacha, it doesn't change the fact that this is halacha's determination.
Right, okay.
Follow what I'm saying?
At the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision.
Yeah. Okay. So for a Jew that has accepted
what
upon
I'm
himself
saying.
that halacha is the determining factor of what God wants, and that's what he's going to follow, right? Now the question is, what is the halachic determination? Okay, that's the question we're going to address. In other words, what I'm saying is that I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to give you a medical opinion on anything, right? I'm going to give you the Torah's perspective on the data presented by doctors. Following?
Okay.
That's the point I wanted to make here, which he alludes to in this word by saying we're looking for what's the moment of death by Jewish law. That's question number one. What's the moment of death? Number two, because the reality is, in order to do a heart transplant, and we want to, lishto means to implant a heart into someone, who is going to die, and that's why we're giving him this new heart. We must remove the heart, muguf adam, from the body of a person, who isn't completely dead, maybe clinically dead, but not completely dead. The heart is still operating in the person from which we are taking the heart. That's the only way in medical science at the moment to do a heart transplant, is if the donor's heart is still in operation. If the donor's heart stops working, you can't do a transplant anymore. It's gone. If you have a very small, quick window, right, in which you take the heart out of one person and put it into the other, after a certain amount of time, the heart ceases to function.
So it's still, okay, so if I understand this correctly, what you're saying.
The heart is removed.
The heart is removed on the live person?
No, so that's where the question comes of determination of what's the moment of death. So a doctor might say this person's clinically dead, considering that they're brain dead. And because they're clinically dead, therefore we can take the heart, which is still beating, and put it into somebody else, which is what they do. Right? It's a very short window. Because otherwise, if the heart stops working, then
There's no point, you're putting a beat to beat.
exactly. So you have to take a heart that's beating. So that's why he doesn't say the person's dead. He says the person's not completely dead. Maybe clinically dead by the doctor's determination.
Right.
If that lines up with halachic determination, we'll have to decide later. We don't know that yet, but that's question number one. But whatever the case is, the person's not completely dead. His heart is still pumping. Otherwise, we can't do a transplant.
So let me just extend this a little bit.
Yeah.
Today, if you have to transplant a brain, for argument's sake,
Yeah,
you would be taking it out of a live person.
theoretically, yeah.
Theoretically, the same.
Yeah. Unless somehow the person's heart stopped working. I don't know. Let's put it aside. I don't know.
But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
taking a finger is not an issue. You're not,
This remains the reality. The heart must be pumping when they do the transplant.
Right.
That's just the reality.
Right.
Just like the lungs must be operating in order to do the transplant.
Yeah,
With the lungs, you have a better time because you can put it into a glass box and you can keep it going for longer. But the heart, you can't do that. So the heart has to happen, like the person has to still be pumping when you take the heart. So even if he's clinically dead, if that's halachic determination, we'll have to decide later. But even if he's clinically dead, he's definitely not completely dead, right? So halei paladai, the heart's still operating. So mis'oder hasafek now the doubt becomes the halacha in Jewish law. Are you allowed to take the heart out of someone who is not dead yet, at least not completely? Even though we know he certainly will die, assuming we know for certainty by whatever determination we're using that he's definitely going to die in the next 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 3 minutes. V'hu b'bchinas treifa. He is in the category of treifa. Treifa is a halachic designation. One second. Applies to animals, which is if an animal has an injury that we know he's certainly going to die by. Yeah. So then the animal is not kosher. Now this person is in such a category in which the sickness at the moment he has is such that he's going to die at X time, or he's not going to live much any longer than that. So now the question is, this person is not completely dead, but we know he's going to die very shortly. Let's say we know it's going to be in the next 5 minutes. Let's just assume we know, right? Can you then take his heart? He's not completely dead. In order to save someone who's in danger, that's quite possible. The person that we're giving the heart to, this operation will actually help him to live longer. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting off 3 minutes of that person's life for the possibility of that guy getting 10 years. That's what I'm doing essentially, right? Because, putting aside this issue of clinically dead, whatever that, that's question one. What exactly is the moment of death? Putting that question aside, this is a heart that's still beating, which means the person's not completely dead yet, but he will be momentarily. Now, if I take his heart out, I'm taking out the heart of a living person and ending his life 2 minutes short, let's say, so that somebody else can get 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Is that allowed by Jewish law? This is a serious question. That's going to be the bulk of his discussion, actually. Meaning the others who are more restrictive are going to learn in the next thing. They make a determination as to what the halacha says, what the moment of death is, and they don't budge from that. The moment of death is when the heart stops beating, or we'll see soon, but whatever. But until that time, you can't touch the person. That's what they're arguing. But he's saying, well, the person is not dead yet, but he's certainly going to die very shortly, and I may be allowed to take his heart to save someone else, and he's going to find some sort of reasons for that. This is the direction we're going. Yeah, what are you going to say?
I'm just saying this is ethics. This is a question on ethics.
Halachic medical ethics, absolutely. Okay, so that was question number one. Now question number two. Number one is, what's the moment of death? Number two is, a person who's almost about to die, can we take his heart to save someone else? Number three, ma das halacha l'etzem hanituach? What is halacha's opinion on the actual operation? Meaning, not on the donor's end. So far, we've been talking about the donor. The person who donated the heart, at what moment is he dead? And may we take his heart? Now let's talk about the recipient. In order for this operation to happen, we have to remove the heart from the sick person. And only after we remove the heart from the living person, we now implant in him a new heart. Right? Now there's a very serious question here. Because the heart is the center of life. And when we take out his heart temporarily, because we're about to put a new heart in him, this person is dead. Never mind the donor, the recipient. When I take out his heart in preparation for the new heart to come in, the moment to take his heart out, I just killed him. If the heart is what makes him live, by Torah definition, right? Now, even though doctors have come up with a machine that can fulfill the heart's function in a mechanical way, for a short amount of time until a new heart arrives. That doesn't take away from the fact that the human here is halachically defined as dead. Maybe. Right? Are we allowed to kill someone and then afterwards revive him? Are we allowed to do that? And if the removal of the heart constitutes killing him, then I temporarily killed him and then revived him with a new one. Is that permissible? Yeah. Even if we are certain that the operation will work and he's going to live longer as a result. But if the halacha, taking the heart is defined as dead, then never mind the donor, I can't take his heart while his heart's still beating. The recipient, I can't take out his heart in order to put a new one in.
Yeah, then that was the whole Pandora's box to everything. To make sure you can't have a window where he's going to be technically dead.
Yeah.
Well, then you can't do anything.
You're talking about the donor.
Anybody.
I'm talking about the recipient.
Even the recipient.
Now we're adding the recipient too. If I have to remove the recipient's heart in preparation for the new heart to come in, right?
Right.
Is that temporary death I'm doing to him? Which means like this. The first two questions only apply if it's human to human. Let's say this new case where it's a question of a pig's heart.
Yeah.
So I'm not killing any human by taking the pig's heart and putting it into the human. So the first two issues aren't an issue anymore. We killed a pig. So what? We killed a pig, right? What's the difference when the moment of death is? The moment of death is when we killed him. It took the heart. right? We don't care. But in order to put the pig's heart into the sky, I got to first take out his heart. Then I just murder him by taking his heart out in preparation for the new heart. And am I allowed to murder someone because I'm going to revive him in a moment from now?
But you're keeping him alive otherwise.
Okay, so that's the question. Is the mechanical function of a heart by external forces constitute alive, or is the person dead?
Well, the same token, sorry,
Yeah.
So the same token that person in the coma is being kept alive by all the stuff, you don't have to show them to pull the plug, right? This happens every single day.
Okay, so that's a question that perhaps
You know what I mean? The
perhaps
people
we'll do another tshuva on euthanasia.
Right? You're
That's perhaps
keeping
another
people
time.
alive days, weeks, months, years sometimes.
So-
Sharon was kept alive.
Yeah, so that's a serious question, and it might come up. But as a principle, though, there's a big difference between not saving a life versus killing a life. In other words, if a person's lying in his bed and he's about to die, am I obligated to rush him to the hospital and put him on a machine? Not necessarily. But if the person's on a machine, am I allowed to pull the plug? Probably not, because they're two different things. One is I'm not doing something actively to save him versus I'm doing an act to kill the guy. So in this case, I'm doing an act to remove his heart. If that constitutes murder, it doesn't matter what I do to keep him alive afterwards. That was an act of murder. If that's the halachic determination. We don't know that yet, right? We're going to get into the article and we'll see the back and forth on it. But this is another consideration. So that's question number 3. Number 2, the first two are get on the donor. At what moment is he dead? And even if he's not dead, am I allowed to take his heart anyway, knowing he's going to die in order to save somebody else? And question number 3 now is on the recipient side. Can I even take his heart out in preparation for the new heart? Pig heart, human heart, doesn't matter. Or the moment to take out the heart, that constitutes murder. So there's very serious questions. Okay, number 4, here's an interesting point. Bottom of the right-hand column. Haskamas hachayla, the agreement of the person who's sick, lenituach, to this operation, meaning as far as question number 3 is, right? Question number 3 is taking out the heart of the recipient, right? So he agrees. He says, take out my heart and give me a new one. I'm okay with it. So he says, "Eina maspika." That's not enough to justify it, right? Because at times, the person who's sick here wants the operation. He wants the heart transplant. He's in a situation of extreme pain, the yush, and he's given up on his life. And he says, I'm desperate here. Give me the operation. Give me a new heart, right? His agreement, goiveles, borders on im ibudas, with someone who is, God forbid, commits suicide. Because he's so desperate to live, he's so desperate to be put out of his pain, right, that he's willing to have his heart removed and a new heart put in. So the fact that he's agreeing to it is not enough to justify it. Because if it constitutes murder, then his agreement is just suicide, that's all. It doesn't count, doesn't make it permissible. Clear? So also it's forbidden for a person to inflict harm upon himself, as we discussed at length in the last series on the question of cosmetic surgery. So Kolshkin, much more so, a person is certainly not allowed to, God forbid, commit suicide. A person does not own his own body, to kill himself, God forbid, through someone else, but I'm allowed to tell somebody else, kill me. Even if the person is in extreme pain and in desperation. And you give citation to this idea. So the last point is that the consent of either the donor or the recipient is not relevant. Because if it's determined as murder, if it's determined that removing the heart, either of the donor or the recipient, if that act constitutes killing, then the fact that they have signed a waiver, the fact that they have agreed to do it, is of no consequence. So this is now we frame the discussion. Yeah, be clear on this? So far we're clear?
In other words, he has no right to.
Yeah, it's yeah. In other words, if it constitutes killing, it doesn't make a difference if you agreed or not. Just because the guy agreed to get himself killed doesn't mean you're allowed to. In fact, you're still not allowed to, right? So now we don't have any answers yet, but now we have at least framed the issue. Yeah, we're clear on this. So these are very, very serious questions, right? In fact, they're so serious that at this point, I have to make a very serious disclaimer, which is anybody listening to this or watching this in the recording later, do not make an actual determination based on what you hear in this class. Consult with your doctor and consult with your local Orthodox rabbi. What we're learning here is perspective. We're learning here ways of thinking about it. We're learning here the sources that discuss it, but we're not making a halachic determination, God forbid. So please don't get any ideas of acting on what you hear here. This is only perspective of understanding the issues. I got to make that very clear. If we do come to a situation where a person might be dealing with such a question, please consult your local Orthodox rabbi before acting, and don't rely on anything you hear in this class. I should say that very clearly. Okay, so before we go into the actual piece of the text, let's look at the source sheet. Yeah, Jake, you have it there. The source sheet. We're going to learn the first 1, 2, 3, and 4 pages, because this is really like the bread and butter of this discussion comes down to this discussion in the Gemara. So this is a Gemara in Yuma, tractate Yuma, page 85a. Yuma da pei he amud aleph. The Gemara reads as follows. I'm reading it with Rabbi Steindal's commentary, as found on Sefaria. It was taught in the Mishnah with regard to one upon whom a rock slide fell, and there is uncertainty whether he is there under the debris or he's not there. And there is uncertainty whether he is still alive or whether he's dead. And there is uncertainty whether the person under the debris is a Gentile or whether he's a Jew. And now it's Shabbos. Am I allowed to go dig up the debris to save this person who may or may not be there, who may or may not be alive, and who may or may not be Jewish? So it's doubt upon doubt upon doubt. And there's a violation of Shabbos here. So says the Mishnah, one clears the pile from atop, clear the debris, and find out if there's anybody in there, and if the person's in there safe. Okay. Gemara asks, what is the Mishnah saying? Why does it bring 3 different uncertainties to illustrate the principle that one violates Shabbos to save a life, even in a case of uncertainty? Why 3 layers of uncertainty? The Gemara explains. It is speaking using the style of needless to say, and the Mishnah should be understood as follows. Needless to say, in the case where it is uncertain whether he is there or not there, one must remove the debris. Since if he is there and he is alive, one must clear the debris. But even if it is uncertain whether he is alive or dead, one must clear the debris. And needless to say, when there's uncertainty whether he is alive or dead, but it is certain that he is a Jew, one must clear the debris. Rather, even that's for sure. Rather, one must clear the debris, even if there's uncertainty whether he's a Jew or Gentile. This is the Mishnah. That no matter what the doubts are, even, always save the guy. Violate Shabbos and save the guy on the off chance that maybe you can save him. Okay.
They're all together.
Well, they're all together. That's right. The Mishnah then, the Gemara, sorry.
If I understand correctly, that you're digging, not necessarily knowing that there's actually something.
That's right. So say, would a Jew be allowed to dig in the rubble of the Twin Towers on Shabbos? Answer yes. Because maybe he'll find the Jew, even if it's Shabbos. Maybe he'll find someone alive. Sorry? In Florida, yes, in Florida, same thing. That's right. I have to go so far back as the 9/11. But in Florida, yeah. So the Mishnah taught, if they found him alive, they continue to remove the debris. This is what the Mishnah says. They're digging, they see he's alive, so they keep on removing the debris to bring him out. So the Gemara is surprised at this. If they find him alive, is it obvious that they remove the debris, since that is saving a life? The Mishnah doesn't need to tell me that. You just finished telling me that maybe he's alive, clear the debris. And then the Mishnah goes on to say that if you find him alive, keep on digging. Well, obviously, you found him alive, keep on digging. Like, what are you trying to say? Obviously, right? That's the whole point of why we're digging here. The Gemara answers, no. It is necessary to teach that one must desecrate Shabbos for his sake, even if it is clear that he's alive, only a short while and will die soon after. So he's alive, but not just a high risk. It's a definite he's going to bleed out, God forbid. Or we can see his skull is crushed, God forbid. He's technically alive, but we know he's not going to live much longer. And if I clear the debris, he'll live a few hours longer or a few minutes longer. Therefore, the Mishnah says, clear the debris, even if it's only to save him for a very short temporary amount of time. Now, this is already a deep, more nuanced chiddush here. the value of not just life, period, but the value of even an extended period amount of time of life, even if it's temporary. Right? Let's see further. The Mishnah taught, if they found him dead, then they should leave him. Right? There was a question only if one person might be under there. They found him and he's dead. No reason to keep on digging. Right? After Shabbos, you'll remove the debris and give him a proper burial. But at the moment, there's no reason to keep on digging because he's dead. So the Gemara is surprised at this. Isn't this also obvious? What allowance might there be to desecrate Shabbos for the sake of a corpse? The Gemara answers no. This ruling is necessary, according to the opinion of Rabbi Huda ben Lakish, as it was taught in the Braita. One may not save a corpse from a fire, since one may not violate Shabbos for the sake of the dead, even though when they dig him in the fire, he's not going to get a proper burial. Right? So Rabbi Huda ben Lakish said, commenting on that, I heard that one may save a corpse from a fire. So it seems to be differing views. The Gemara challenges. Even Rabbi Huda ben Lakish said this only with regard to a fire because if a person is agitated over his dead relative, whose body might be burnt in the fire, and he's all nervous the whole Shabbos, he can't sit still because his relative is being burnt in the fire, he's not going to get a proper burial. If you do not permit him to remove the corpse, he may come to extinguish the fire and transgress an even more severe prohibition. So if you tell him, hey, you can't run in there and take the body out, he's going to get water and put the fire out because he really wants to save his family's body to bury him. So therefore we say, okay, go in there and save the body. However, here, in the case of a rock slide or a building collapse, if you do not permit him to remove the debris, what might he do? It's not like the body is at risk of decay. It's not as if we're at risk of losing the body for burial. It's just a question of sitting there for a day. That's the only question here. So leave it. In this case, there's no concern of Shabbat desecration, and preserving the dignity of the dead does not override Shabbos. If that's the case, leave him as is and wait till after Shabbos. Okay, and that's why it was important for the Mishnah to make the statement not to save him once you find them as dead, so that you don't assume that the dignity of the dead overrides Shabbos. You would think you might be allowed to, similar to this case of the fire, where you're allowed to yank him out, at least according to Rabbi ben Lakish. Now, the Gemara makes a distinction. When there's a question of a fire, and there's this concern you might lose the body entirely, and if we don't let the family take the body out, the family's going to put the fire out with the water, which is definitely a violation of Shabbos. Whereas pulling the body out, there's maybe a violation. So, okay, we'll let them do the minor violation of taking the body out. But when it comes to a body lying in a pile of debris, and we know it's dead, there's no reason to do anything. Wait till after Shabbos. Nothing's happening. The body's not going to get lost. The corpse is not going to get lost. You'll still be able to bury it on Sunday. Okay, now here comes the real main point that we have to get to in this whole discussion. So far we're clear? You have it with me? Yeah, if on Zoom I'm not clear, interrupt me, please.
You guys are on
Yes, some people. Yeah. I sent the link there. Who you want to send it to? He's on. Dennis is on. Dennis is on it, Jacob. Okay, so the rabbis taught. This is the real main point of the Gemara we need to get to. The rabbis taught, if a person is buried under a collapsed building, until what point does one check to clarify whether the victim is still alive? Now we're coming to a question of moment of death. The Mishnah now, the Gemara wants to clarify how far do you have to dig to determine whether he's alive or not. So, which organ do you check? Right? And this will help us know if he's alive or dead. And this will help us know what organ Halacha determines is the moment of death. It's how far do you have to dig? Yeah? So until what point is he allowed to continue clearing debris? So they said, one clears until the victim's nose. Until his nose. If there's no sign of, until his nose is uncovered. Once his nose is uncovered, you can determine by the nose if he's alive or dead. Right? Yeah. N-O-S-E. If there's no sign of life, i.e., if he's not breathing, he is certainly dead. So this is one determination as for the moment of death. Lack of breath in the nose, in the nostrils. Right? Because after that, no checking. We're not done yet. That's one opinion. And some say one clears until the victim's heart to check for a heartbeat. So now we have two different determinations. Breathing versus heartbeat. Clear? Right. See? So if several people are buried and one checked and found the upper ones under the debris dead, he should not say the lower ones are likely already dead. In other words, let's say there's 10 people expected under the debris. and they find that the first two people they found at the top are dead. So the person shouldn't think, oh, the guys lower are definitely dead. No, keep on digging. Right? The lower ones are likely also, you shouldn't say, the lower ones are likely also already dead, and there's no point in continuing to search. But rather you should continue search even though the ones in the upper half of the debris are dead. Keep on searching for the ones lower. There was an incident where they found the upper ones dead and the lower ones alive, and therefore, you can get a pocket of air somewhere below, and the person can survive even though someone up on top got hit by something and died. Okay, now the Gemara gets to commenting on the issue before, which is how far do you have to dig, and which organ tells you if he's alive or not. And remember, we had two determinations: heart or breath. Two opinions as to how far to dig, which would tell us which organ are we relying on when we determine whether the person's alive or dead, breath or heartbeat. Says the Gemara, page 3. The Gemara comments, let us say that this dispute between the Tanaim, who disagree about checking for signs of life between the heart or the nose, is like the dispute between these Tanaim, other Tanaim, who disagree about the formation of the fetus. Yeah. The dispute before ultrasounds, the sages were discussing how the fetus is formed. And maybe the way we describe the fetus as being formed correlates with the way we would determine the moment of death. This is what the Gemara is suggesting. So says the Gemara, as it was taught in the Braita, from what point is the fetus created? From what point in the body? It is from its head, says one opinion, as it is stated in the verse, you are he who took me out of my mother's womb. And it says, cut off your hair and cast it away. The word for took me out and the word for my hair is the same root word, gazi, and thus to determine that the forming in the womb, this, as he says here, these verses suggest that one is created from the head and at the place of the hair. Okay, because the formation, the word for formation and the word for hair is the same word, and therefore we can determine that the place from which the verse describes I'm formed from that gazi is the same thing as the other verse which uses the word gazi, which is the head. Yeah, opinion number 1. So Abba Shaul says a person is created from his navel, and he sends his roots in every direction until he attains the image of a person. Yeah, which is the way we understand it today.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the umbilical cord, right?
You know what the umbilical?
That's where your umbilical cord was.
Yeah.
That's where you were attached.
So that's
No
so
longer attached.
that's right. So the source of life starts there, and from there it starts. That's right. It starts there. That's the umbilical.
The brain.
No. The umbilical cord is there, and first there's a heartbeat well before brain. There's a heartbeat well before the brain is formed. Well before even the head is formed. There's a heartbeat. The first thing from the navel starts, and almost right away there's a heartbeat within a few weeks, and then slowly the rest of the body starts to form. That's the way we know it today. But there's two opinions in that back then: head or as we know today from the navel. So now the Gemara wants to correlate this between the two opinions of heartbeat versus breath. The Tana, who says that the presence of life is determined based on the nose, holds in accordance with the opinion of the Tana, who maintains that the formation of a fetus begins with its head. We start with the head and end with the head, the nose, breath. Likewise, the Tana, who says the presence of life is determined based on the heart, check for the heartbeat, holds in accordance with the opinion of the one who thinks the formation of fetus begins with its navel, which is the heart, the first thing to develop. So in other words, like this, what the Gemara is suggesting is, if the first thing to develop is the brain, then your breath is going to determine whether you're alive or dead. If the first thing to develop is the heart, then that's what's going to determine whether you're alive or dead. Okay. Gemara rejects this and says no. Even if you say that the formation of a fetus from the navel is the opinion of Abba Shaul, he nevertheless require one check the nose for life. So even if we are of the view, like we know today, that the body is formed starting from the heart, nonetheless, when it comes to determining the moment of death, we're still going to stick with the breath of the nose. How's that? Because until now, Abba Shaul spoke there only about formation, saying that everything is created from its middle. However, as for saving a life, even Abba Shaul admits that the main sign of life is in the nose, as it is written, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life. So it would seem to me that the Gemara is making a distinction between the body and life. Even if the body is formed from the heart, and this is our determination today, nonetheless, life, the soul of life that God grants into the body, is in the nose, is in the breath. Sorry, yeah. Okay. But here comes now here comes the plot twist. All right, here comes the plot twist of the whole thing. Now, Papa said, the dispute with regard to how far to check for signs of life applies when the digger begins removing the rubble from below, starting with the feet to above. So if you're starting at the feet and you're going downward, so what are you hitting first? What are you hitting first?
How is the person buried? Upside down?
That's the point. So when they said that you check for the heart, sorry, right? It's only when you're checking from below to above. The first thing you see is his feet. So now that I saw his feet first, how far down in the body do I have to go to check if he's alive or not? So in such a case, it's insufficient to check until his heart. Rather, one must continue removing rubble until he's able to check his nose for breath.
All the way.
All the way. But if one cleared the rubble from above to below, starting from the head, once he checked as far as the victim's nose, he's not required to check further. As it is written, all of his nostrils are breath, the spirit of life.
But this is contradictory. We just said before,
Mhm.
we said that if he's buried up to his nose and above, then forget you to check because he can't breathe.
No. Let me make this clear. He's completely buried under. We don't know where he is. We start digging. We find part of his body. Let's say we see his head first. We check his nose, he's not breathing. Should I continue digging or not? Answer no, because he's dead. What if I don't see anything? I start digging and now I see his feet. I keep on going. I find his heartbeat. It's not there. The heartbeat's done. Do I keep on going or not?
Yes.
So said the puppet, you keep on going so you get the nostrils,
Right. Wow.
right?
Even if you take the pulse before.
Even though you hit his heartbeat before and it's not working, you still keep on going until you find his nostrils. Yeah,
That's a twist.
which seems right, which implies that the person is still alive so long as there is breath in his nostrils. Sorry,
Where's that coming from?
Residual.
Physiological
I don't know.
treatment. So
So that means what?
heart is not functioning, but breathing.
Seems like, yeah, what's going on here, right? Let's see. So this is the dispute in the Gemara, right? Right?
Isn't everything dependent on each other?
So let's read it again. Let's read. But these things go down. They don't stop all mine simultaneously. They
Right,
stop in
not
stages.
like-
Right. So let's go to let's read our Papa's statement again slowly. Now, Papa said the dispute with regard to how far to check for signs of life, should I go to the heart or go down to the nose, applies when the digger begins removing the rubble from below, starting with the feet to above. In such a case, it is insufficient, according to one opinion at least, to check until his heart. Rather, one must continue removing the rubble until he's able to check the nose for breath. But if one cleared the rubble from above to below, once he checked as far as the victim's nose, he doesn't have to go any farther. Okay. Now, let's see how we rule Halacha. Says Rambam. When an avalanche has fallen, we're looking at now the Rambam Laws of Shabbos, chapter 2, Halacha number 18 and 19. So Rambam reads like this. When an avalanche has fallen, and there's a doubt whether or not it has fallen over a person, it may be cleared even on Shabbos. If the person was discovered to be alive, but was crushed by the fallen debris to the extent that it is impossible that he will recover, the debris may be cleared and the person take it out to enable him to live however long he does, even if I'm helping him live for an extra 5-10 minutes. Right? So this is what we learned from the Gemara, that even saving his life for temporary measure is also worthwhile. Yeah? Now let's see. If in the process of clearing the debris, they reached his nose and saw that he was not breathing, he should be left there for he has died already. Although it is discovered that people, right? This is the main point. You have to check for the nose. If there's breath in his nose, until the point that the breath in his nose stops, he is alive. Even if his heartbeat stopped already. Right, clear? This is how Rambam rules. So even if his heart stopped, if there's breath, he's still alive. Right, which means at this point, can you take the person's heart out? Can you take the person's heart out or not? No.
If he's still breathing.
No, you can't.
But if he's still breathing.
And he's alive, then you can't take him. You can't take it. He's alive.
But you can't take it if he's dead.
That's right. Which means at this point,
Means there's no transplant.
which means no transplant.
Right.
That's what this means.
In
Unless
that case,
that's what it would mean. because he's still alive if his heart's pumping. Only once his breath stops do we say that he's considered dead now. Once his breath stops, his heart certainly stopped. If that's the case, no transplant. This is argument number one to answer question number one, which is what's the moment of life?
Great.
It's right, which means that's right, which means a person could be brain dead, but is still technically by Torah law alive. There's still breath and still a beating heart, and therefore you cannot transfer the heart transplant. Dennis, want to ask something? Go ahead. You have to mute yourself first. We're not done yet.
What about the possibility of someone whose heart has stopped,
Yeah.
who is not breathing, but they could still be resuscitated? That happens.
Yeah. So the question,
How do you deal with that?
or not, right? I mentioned this before. Depending on the circumstance, once you consult with an Orthodox rabbi before one does anything like this. And recently, unfortunately, I had to deal with such a case more than once. Actually, recently, I did not take it up on my shoulders myself. I spoke to greater authorities in the city to help me with this. But not always do I have to schlep the guy's body to the hospital to save him, just to put him onto a machine. Right? But resuscitating it, right?
Yeah. 100%.
Right. And what you're arguing is that the person's alive even after his heart stopped. That's what you're trying to argue. Because in theory, you can resuscitate him.
Yeah, the possibility is that he may still be alive, even though his heart has stopped beating and he is not breathing.
Okay, so let's just go with that.
It has happened.
Yeah, then definitely you cannot transfer. Then you definitely can't do a heart transplant if that's the case. Because heart transplants only work if the heart's still beating, which means he's alive, which means you can't take the heart. That's what this.
Yeah, but at the moment he's found, his heart is not beating. So
right, but not
based on the Gemara, he's clinically dead.
Do a heart transplant, if it's not beating, it doesn't work. A heart transplant only works if you take from a beating heart. So therefore, you would never get to a point at which the person's halachically dead and still have a functioning heart. That's the point here.
Okay, all right, good. All right, thank you.
We're not done yet, and I mentioned the first text we're reading is going to be more permissive, but this is the beef of the discussion. When we get to determining the moment of death, by Torah law, it's so long as he has breath in his nostrils, he's still alive. Which means if his heart's beating, he's definitely still alive. This is the halachic determination. Right? Okay, so now let's see inside the text of Rabbi Gershoni. It should be a little easier to get through because we went through the Gemara already. Okay, so Aleph, question number one. Masai nechshav la'adam mes apyalach. At what point is one considered dead by halachic standards? Says Rabbi Gershoni, we have the answer. He's going to cite to our Gemara we just finished reading. And I read it at length because it's important, because it's going to come up again and again. We're going to keep on referencing back to this Gemara, and it's important that we know it well. So Gemara Meforeshes B'Yuma Parakeh, it is a straight up passage in the Talmud in Yoma Chapter, Pehei, not Parakeh, Pehei, 85, which we just read. Misha Naflal of Mapolis B'Shabbos, one upon whom a building collapsed on Shabbos. Mefaktin al Lavas Agal, you can remove the debris, Mishum Pikuach Nefes, in order to save his life. Even if the chances that we'll find him alive, him kolushim, are very weak. Nonetheless, you still nonetheless violate Shabbos, remove the debris in the hopes that you might find him.
So it's important to point out that this is otherwise a malacha of Shabbos.
This is otherwise a violation of Shabbos. That's right. Matzou, they find him alive. Nisroitzis, I think he means like the person's crushed, and he will not live. But he's alive now. The Gemara told us, and we learned this, the Bakrin of Sagal, you still continue to remove the debris, and we take him out of the debris, even if he's only going to live temporarily. Yeah, we determine this. But they check until his nose, and they find no breath in his nostrils. Leave him there. And we do not violate Shabbos on his behalf, because if there's no breath, there's no life, and no reason to remove the debris. And the Gemara there determines the primary life of a human is in his breath. The Ksiv, as the verse reads, all those who have a living soul in their nostrils, implying that life is in the nostril, life is in the breath. V'yesh say Rabbi Sugya, 1 second, there is an opinion in the Gemara which says, Shaboit Kimaliba, you check his heartbeat. If the heart doesn't beat, Siman Shumes, then it means he's dead. So it's a question of heartbeat versus breath. Either way, if the termination of death is at the moment the heartbeat stops, or the termination of death is when the breath stops, either way, you can't do a heart transplant because both of those are past the point at which the heart is viable. Yeah, so what do you want to say?
Okay, it's a horrible situation. Let's say that's Shalom. You see somebody crushed Shabbos morning.
Yeah.
You see somebody crushed, covered with rocks, and you go to check on him.
Yeah.
No breath in his lungs. No. Now you're gonna say you leave him there till Motzei Shabbos?
Yeah.
What about the other halacha about burying somebody as soon as possible?
That doesn't override Shabbos.
It doesn't.
No. That's so shocking. Talking about Shabbos.
No.
You're not saving his life anymore. It's a question of
Couple.
okay, so cover doesn't override Shabbos, right? Okay. Now says Rabbi Gershoni further. Rambam Pasuk, Rambam rules. Perek Beis Mehilchos Shabbos Halacha Test in chapter 2 of the laws of Shabbos, Halacha number 19, which we read. The Ikar Chayos, he rules that the primary life is Talib and Shimas Achaitim is dependent on breath in the nostrils. Lefizeh, based on this, we can determine, says Rabbi Gershoni, Imoitzi and Esalev Ben Adam, if you remove the heart from man, Shenifka that was struck, kosher very strongly, but to unas drachim in a car accident, let's just say, we know he's not going to live. Because his skull has been crushed, God forbid. So he's not going to live. But his heart's still beating. So might see in a sliboy is manchu oid noishem. And we remove his heart while he's still breathing. Because otherwise his heart is not functioning and not viable for the other patient, for the recipient. So we're removing his heart while he's still breathing. And by Torah law, at this moment, he's considered alive. Then the doctor, which removes the heart, would constitute a murderer. This is a serious charge. And seemingly, it's forbidden to do such a thing. You can't kill one person to save another person. You cannot kill one person to save another. And if removing a beating heart is by the halachic definition death, then just because doing so is going to save someone else does not mean you're allowed to. You cannot murder to save someone else's life. So this is the premise, of course, of those who forbade it, those who are restrictive. But as I mentioned, Rabbi Gershon is going to be permissive, so he's going to find ways to get around this, as we're going to learn. But this is the ground.
It seems like we're being lost in a technicality here when there's a solution at hand.
What's the technicality and what's the solution?
The technicality is that removing the heart kills him from that moment. But when you put in a new heart, then he'll be back to life.
No. We're talking about the donor. The donor is dying. When you remove his heart, he's dead. He's over.
Okay.
Not the recipient.
Okay.
We're talking about the donor now.
Okay.
No, not another donor. There's a donor and there's a recipient. Right? The donor the way he described it, the guy was in a car accident.
Right.
His skull is crushed, God forbid. He's still breathing, but he's not going to make it.
Right.
So taking his heart to put it into somebody else would constitute murder because he's alive. His heart's beating, even though he's not going to live. This is a very serious charge. And this is the foundation for the whole discussion. And those who are restrictive, as we're going to learn, God willing, from the Tzitz Eliezer, they end the discussion here. Removing a beating heart is murder. End of story. You may not do it. That's where they end the discussion. And they will deal with the other issues that he's going to raise, but this is basically where the discussion stops. But of course, Rabbi Gershon is going to keep on going, adding more nuance. So let's see.
Doesn't it also relate to what we discussed as organ donors?
Very same thing. Can I sign up? So can I sign an organ donation card?
No.
Certainly not for my heart.
Right.
That would be giving permission to the doctor to murder me.
But you're mutilating the body after it's been dead. It's not.
So the issue of kavod, so that's a separate issue. The issue of kavod hames, of honoring the dead, is not as severe a charge as murder.
Okay.
Right? So maybe I'll forego my own personal dignity if it's going to mean someone else will live longer, right? let's say I can make that determination. But I certainly cannot make a determination to allow myself to be murdered for the sake of someone else living. That I can't do. And if removing my heart constitutes murder, then I may not sign that declaration. You should note, there's an organization called HODS, Halachic Organ Donation Society. Look it up online. I don't love everything they do, but in theory, for a number of reasons, I don't like what they do. But their premise is a good one. What they do is you sign a donation card that informs a doctor that they can only take non-vital organs. So, or organs that can survive after death, say a liver. Even after the heart and breath stop, you can still transfer a liver, or maybe even a kidney. I'm not sure which ones. I'm not a doctor again. I don't know. Maybe you know better, Jacob. But I think those survive a little longer than after the heartbeat ends. So those ones, in theory, you could donate. Right? So they have a good premise. Again, talk to your local next rabbi before you sign that card. My main issue with their card is that you are trusting that the doctor in the split-second decision of when you're dead is actually going to read the card carefully and where it says not to take a heart. Right? If God forbid a person's in an accident, family's not there. The first thing they do is look for the wallet and they look for an organ donor card. If they find one, they rip open the body and take whatever there is. They can save other patients in the hospital, right? And you think the doctor's going to sit there and read carefully? It says, no, don't take the heart. You're relying on like an unknown person in an unknown location to actually fall through.
Right.
So that's the main reason why people are scared of even signing this halachic organ donation. But in theory, they got it right. In that they supposedly are signing a document that only allows the doctor to transfer such organs that are not life-threatening and or they survive after the heart stops beating. And they're still viable later.
When it comes to the
You're talking about split-second decision. There's a car accident. People rush into the hospital. They look for organ donation cards. This guy's not living. Bam, cut his body open, take out stuff to save somebody else. It happens in seconds. Because after a few minutes, the heart's no longer viable and it's gone. You lose it. To be crass, you live an extremely expensive commodity if you don't act quickly. Heart, right? So to rely on some unknown doctor in an unknown hospital that God forbid you might end up in to read the fine print, I don't know. Which is why people are scared before they sign such a thing. But I guess, again, in theory, they have it right. Okay, so let's continue. Yeah, we clear so far? So we've determined the moment of death. And if we were to end the discussion here, then a heart transplant would constitute murder of the donor, because if his heart's beating and he still has breath, he's still alive, even if he may die soon. But now comes another question, and this is really the direction of those who are permissive, is the next question that Rabbi Gershon is going to raise, which will skirt this issue as follows. We must clarify a new point. Are we allowed to save someone who is in certain danger? The only thing that can save this person is a heart transplant. Can you do so? Are you allowed to save his life on the account of shortening someone else's life who we know is going to die by halachic determination? By right from coverage, and the doctor determines he certainly won't live. Let's explain what he means here. The Gemara, when the Gemara said at the moment of death is his breath, it wasn't talking about a case where they were weighing one life against the other. They were weighing his life on its own merits. And on his own merits, we determined that as long as there's a heartbeat, as long as there's a breath, he's still alive, keep on digging. But what if it's not, that does not tell me, right? So that means that I have to save his life, even if he's not going to live much longer, but he's still alive by halachic standards. But maybe knowing that he's going to die in the matter of a few minutes, am I allowed to use him to save someone else and give him much longer life? That we have not been given determination based on the story of the guy stuck under the rubble on Shabbos. Because the guy stuck under the rubble on Shabbos, it's weighing his life against his life, not against somebody else's. But here, we're now evaluating one life against another. Now, as far as one life against another goes, we have to look now at our source sheet again, because this is the Gemara's language, is very important here.
But that you only
Source sheet number 4.
You only speak out against this. You say, I'm not God. I'm not going to take on his role of choosing one merit of life or the other.
That's usually the attitude, but doctors certainly like to play God, no joking. But, if halacha determines, halacha determines, right? I agree with you. I'm just making the argument.
Right.
Okay, so let's see the Gemara's language, and we'll understand where Rabbi Gershon is coming from. So the Gemara is on the bottom of page 4. The Gemara is in Sanhedrin, Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, page 74a. The Gemara reads as follows, very famous Gemara. The Gemara there is discussing the 3 cardinal sins for which one ought to give up their lives rather than transgress. Yahareg, let themselves die, Ba'al Yaver, and should not transgress. And these 3 sins are idol worship, illicit relationships, and murder. Someone puts a gun to your head, God forbid, and says, bow down to the idol or die. Halacha says, take the bullet. Same thing with murder, a gun to your head, murder that guy or I murder you. Halacha says, get killed rather than kill. And same thing with an illicit relationship. Okay. Now there are circumstances to this law. There are details to the law. What are the circumstances? Is it in public? Is it in private? Is it during a time when there's persecution? Is it not during a time during this persecution? All kinds of details, but this is the general principle. These are the 3 cardinal sins for which Yahareg Ba'al Yaver, let himself be killed rather than transgress the sin. So now says the Gemara like this, in determining how we know from scripture that this is indeed the case, that one should allow himself to get killed rather than to transgress. The Gemara says like this. From where is it derived? Bottom of page 4. From where is it derived that one must allow himself to be killed rather than transgress the prohibition of forbidden sexual relations and the prohibition of bloodshed? Get killed rather than murder, get killed rather than have a forbidden sexual relationship. Says the Gemara, this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, as it is taught in the Braita. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi said, with regard to the rape of a betrothed young woman, it is written, with respect to someone, a young woman who's engaged, who God forbid is raped. So the verse reads, quote, but you shall do nothing to the young woman has committed no sin worthy of death. For as when a man rises against his neighbor and slay him, so too with this matter. In other words, what the verse is saying is in ancient culture, many ancient cultures, a girl who was raped was just as liable as the person who raped. She was defiled, and she is a terrible woman because she allowed herself to be raped, and she was treated horribly. So comes the verse and says, no, she did nothing wrong. Just like when one person murders somebody else, the one who was murdered did nothing wrong, so too it is when a guy rapes a girl, the girl did nothing wrong. Leave her alone. The raper, the rapist, he's got to get dealt with. Is what the verse says. Treat the rapist and the woman who was raped, the victim, the way you would treat a murderer and the one who was murdered. The one who was murdered certainly is innocent, he's a victim, and the murderer is to be dealt with. So the victim of rape, God forbid, the rape victim is in, today it seems like common sense, but I'm just telling you, in ancient culture was not such common sense. But the key here is the Torah compares a murderer to a rapist. So we have this notion of forbidden sexual relationships being linked to murder, right? So says the Gemara, like this. But why would the verse mention murder in this context? It could have just said, the victim of rape did nothing wrong. The rapist is the problem. Deal with him. Why compare it to murderer? But what do we learn here from a murderer? There must be some law about a murderer that is teaching us about this forbidden relation. Says the Gemara. Now, the mention of murder in the verse with regard to the rapist came in order to teach halacha about the betrothed young woman. And it turns out that in addition to teaching a law, in addition to the fact that the murder scenario teaches us something about the rapist scenario, it turns out that it also derives a halacha from the case. In other words, the case of murder teaches us something about rape, and the case of rape teaches us something about murder. There's a excuse me, as is often the case in juxtaposition in Torah, each of the 2 laws mentioned teach each other something. Yes, we're clear. So the Torah juxtaposes the case of murderer to the case of a betrothed young woman to indicate that just as in the case of a betrothed young woman, one may save her at the cost of the rapist's life. If the only way for me to save the victim of rape is to kill the rapist, then go ahead and kill the rapist. Again, if it's the only way to do it. If I can, I don't know, break his leg, then break his leg. But if the only way to stop him from raping this girl is to murder him, I shouldn't even use the word murder because it does not constitute murder.
Right.
It's killing. There's a big difference between murder and killing,
Yeah.
right? But if the only way to stop the rapist is to kill him, then go ahead, kill him. So too in the case of a murderer, one may save the potential victim at the cost of the murderer's life. If I see someone about to murder someone else, and the only way to stop the murder is by killing the potential murderer, I kill the murderer, just as is the case that I kill the rapist if that's the only way to stop him from raping. Clear?
What's the story in the Torah with the character who does that with a spear and he kills both people at once?
That's a different story, but it's similar. That's Pinchas.
Right.
Similar story. It's a different story. Okay, so let's make this clear. The case of the murder, the case of the murderer, in the case of the rapist, we know that if the only way to stop the rapist is by killing him, I may do so. So that teaches me if the only way to stop the murder is by killing the murderer, then I go ahead and do that. Now, conversely, the Torah juxtaposes a betrothed young woman to a murderer to indicate that just as with regard to a potential murderer, the halacha is that if one was ordered to murder another, I was ordered, someone put a gun to my head and said, murder someone else. He must be killed and not transgress the prohibition of bloodshed. I should take the bullet rather than, God forbid, kill somebody else. So too with regard to a betrothed young woman, if she is faced with rape, she must be killed and not transgress the prohibition of forbidden sexual relations. If the choice is death, or God forbid, this forbidden sexual relation, take the bullet. And this is derived from where? From the fact that I should take the bullet rather than murder someone. Clear? We clear on this?
Yeah.
Yes or no? Right. So the case of rape, we know that if the only way to stop the rapist is by killing him, then that teaches us that when it comes to a murder, the only way to stop the murder is by killing him, kill him. Now, conversely, when it comes to murder, I know that I better take the bullet rather than kill someone else. So too with the rapist, rather get killed than allow yourself to be sexually violated. Yeah. So now the Gemara asks,
Death isn't an option.
sorry?
The death isn't an option at the time.
Okay, so then she's innocent, says the Torah, right?
Right.
Now the question becomes, in the case of murder, how do you know that you're supposed to take the bullet rather than murder? Maybe you should kill someone to save your life. How do you know you're supposed to take the bullet rather than kill? Yeah. The Gemara takes that as a premise and says that teaches you the law of the rapist, that take the bullet rather than get sexually violated, right? But how do I know when it comes to murder that it's preferable that I take the bullet rather than kill? How do we know? Says the Gemara like this, and this is the key right here. Gemara asks, from where do we derive this halacha with regard to a murderer himself, that one must allow himself to be killed rather than commit murder? The Gemara answers, listen carefully. It is based on logical reasoning that one life is not preferable to another, and therefore there's no need for a verse to teach it the halacha. The Gemara explains. The Gemara relates an incident to demonstrate the point. As when a certain person came before Rabbi and said to him, the Lord of my palace, a local official, said to me, go kill so-and-so, and if not, I will kill you. What should I do? Imagine you going to the rabbi to ask such a question. The local authority came to you and said, listen, buddy, go kill your neighbor, or I'm coming to you and killing you. And you can be certain he means it. The crazy thing is, cases like this happened, of course, during the war, during the Holocaust. And we have records of people who went in the camps and asked the rabbi, what should I do? Yeah, there's a book called, oh my gosh, Sridei Eish, a book of responsa written by a rabbi who was in the camps, and people fielded questions to him in the camps, and he wrote down his responsa after the war. I think it's called the Sridei Eish. Incredible.
That there was a rabbi.
Yeah, he was a famous, well-known rabbi before the war, and he was in the camps in Auschwitz. Imagine people came to him under such duress and wants to know, well, what's the moral thing to do? The fact that people had the wherewithal to even ask the question is incredible. And the same thing here. This guy's life is on the line. If he doesn't kill his neighbor, he's going to get killed. It's a fact. And instead of just running for the hills or just killing the neighbor and get away with it, he goes to the rabbi and says, I want to know what to do. The fact that he even has the wherewithal to ask is incredible. So what did the Rav say? What did Rabbi say? Says the Gemara, Rabbi said to him, it is preferable that he, the the official should kill you and you should not kill. And Rabbi explained his reasoning. Who is to say that your blood is redder than his? That your life is more worth war than the one he wants you to kill? Perhaps the man's blood is redder. This logical reading is the basis for the halacha that one may not save his own life by killing another. So what do we have from here? What's the logic to say that one life, what's the logic to say that you should die rather than kill? The logic is, because who said your life is more valuable? You've decided that I better kill that one so I can live. Who decided your life is more valuable? In the language of the Gemara, my chazis the damach samuktvei. Who told you that your blood is redder? Now, says Rabbi Gershoni, does the same logic apply when someone's about to die in 5 minutes? Someone's about to die in 5 minutes. And here's a guy who has a potential to live another 30, 40, 50 years. So maybe the guy who's living for 30, 40, 50 years, maybe his blood is, quote, redder than the guy who's going to die in 5 minutes. If the reason why you're supposed to die rather than kill someone else is because who's to say whose blood is more red? Well, maybe the guy who got potential for 50 years of life, his blood is more red than the guy who's got potential, who doesn't have any potential. He's dying in 3 minutes from now. Right. So maybe then, even if it is murder, so to speak, to kill someone who has a beating heart, but maybe I'm allowed to do this kind of murder because his blood is not so red, so to speak, because he's going to die in 3 minutes from now.
Let's say
following?
Yeah.
It's a clever kind of way of skirting the issue. You can already see the holes in the argument because murder is murder. But putting it aside for now, this is the angle. Quite interesting, no? Okay.
Let's say,
which, by the way, just before I get anywhere else, modern medicine, this is the same thing argument.
Right.
This guy's clinically dead. Why are they calling it clinically dead and not actually dead? Why they add the word clinical? To differentiate, because he's not really dead, but he's clinically dead because he's going to be dead in 3 minutes from now. So it's a way of patting down the problem of murdering a guy 3 minutes early, which is essentially the argument he's making. We can murder someone 3 minutes early because his life is not as valuable, so to speak. Right? You can see the problems in the argument, but at least we know where he's coming from. Yeah, what are you going to say? Sorry.
So I think this has come up recently in the news often, sure, and even regular. So there's two people, and either dead, and one's 95 and one's 10.
Yeah.
I think ethics will say that the 10-year-old kid will get the treatment.
So okay, so that's a very serious question, but it's not the same. Because in this case, I'm not actively murdering the older guy. Right. So the case that Mayor just mentioned is we only have one available treatment, and do we give it to the 10-year-old or do we give it to the 90-year-old? Right? And modern medicine would give it to the 10-year-old because he has more life ahead of him than the 90-year-old who doesn't. So is that the same thing here? Right? The difference is I'm not actively murdering the 90-year-old. I'm just not saving him. Right? Whereas in the case where I'm taking the guy's heart out, I'm actively murdering him 3 minutes early. I'm actively murdering him. It's similar to pulling the plug versus not putting the plug in. Right? So it's a bit worse in this case. Right? It's a bit worse in this case, but he's still presenting the argument that perhaps the guy who's got longer life ahead of him, his blood is redder, so to speak, because the guy who's going to die in 2 minutes from now, he's got a clock that we can determine happening very, very shortly. Okay, so let's learn a little bit more. Let's look on the bottom of page 5, one more text from the Gemara, which further strengthens this argument that someone who's about to die doesn't have the same halachic value as someone who has a longer life ahead of him. And this is a very serious Gemara. So let's see. This is a few pages later in the Gemara. The Gemara we read before about the whose blood is redder, that's on page 74 of Sanhedrin. The Gemara we're about to read on the top, page 6, is on 78a. So it's 4 pages later. The Gemara reads as follows. The sages taught, very interesting case. If 10 people struck an individual with 10 sticks, and as a result of the beating, he died. So 10 people, 10 sticks. Whether they beat him simultaneously, or whether they beat him one after the other, they are all exempt from liability for killing him, as 2 people are not liable for an action that they perform together. So let's make this clear. It's forbidden, but he's not liable. Because we cannot pin the action on one person. So even though it's forbidden to do so, liability is only for one person. Right?
It's like the last person to open the pickle jar.
Something like that. That's right. So now, Rabbi Huda ben Beseda says, if they struck him one after another, the one who struck him last is liable because he hastened his death. So there's a determination to be made here. Simultaneously, they all murdered him at once. We can't pin the murder on anybody. Okay. But if 9 people got him on the brink of death and one guy put him over the brink, then the guy who put him over the brink is liable because he did the actual murder. The other people are liable for hitting someone, not liable for murder. The last guy is liable for murder. Clear? Now let's go further. Rabbi Yochanan said, and both rabbis, i.e. the first Tana and Rabbi Huda ben Beteda, interpreted the same verse in drawing their halacha conclusion, meaning the first opinion which said they're all not liable, even the last guy, whereas Rabbi Huda ben Beteda said, no. If there's a last guy, then he is liable, right? This is the dispute. Be clear? Be clear on this or no? There's a dispute here. The first opinion, the Tanakama, the first author says that no one's liable because they each have an equal portion in the act, and we cannot pin it on anybody. Rabbi Huda ben Beteda says if the last person was after everybody else, he is liable. There's a dispute. Can you pin it on the last guy or not? So says Rabbi Yochanan, these two sages were looking at the same verse to derive their analysis. The verse states, a man who strikes any soul mortally, meaning anyone who kills somebody else, he shall be put to death. The rabbis hold that the word any soul, a man who strikes any soul, called nefesh, means that one is liable for murder only when there's an entire soul, i.e. when the murderer alone is responsible for taking the entire life of the victim. Because the verse says, one man took any soul of another. So if he took any soul, he has to be taking a full soul, a full life. And in this case, he did not take a full life because 10 people, each of which took 10% of his life. Right? Clear? Yes or no? Yeah. Now, Rabbi Huda ben Beteda holds that any soul means that one is liable for murder for taking any soul, meaning even any portion. Even if the victim has already been beaten and he is close to death because he took a portion. So when it says kol nefesh, which means any life means any kind of life, even if it's tiny amount, or any life means so long as it's an entire life. There's a dispute. If you're of the view that it has to be the entire life, then when 10 guys did it together, they each took 10%, no one's liable. Forbidden, but not liable. Whereas if you translate the verse to mean any life means any portion of life, then the guy who did the last bit, he's liable because there's still some life left. Okay, now, Rava said, all concede that in the case of one who kills one who has a wound that will cause him to die within 12 months, he's a treifa. So this person has a wound from which he's going to die within the year. And now someone comes and kills him. He is exempt from liability, as in a certain sense, the legal status of the victim is that of a dead person. So if he's going to die within a year, you may not kill him, but you're not liable for capital punishment as you would be if you killed somebody else. Following? So you see your halachic distinction between someone who's about to die versus someone who isn't about to die. Clear? We see this already? See where we're going? Okay. All concede in a case where one kills an individual dying from an illness caused at the hand of heaven that he is liable. In other words, if God made him be in a sick situation and we think he's going to die in the next year, then if you kill him, you're certainly liable, as no other individual took action contributing to his death, and the murderer alone took his remaining life. Right? So if the person has a wound from which he's definitely going to die in a 12 months, right? No liability. If God put him in a sick situation and you hastened his death, definitely liability. So where's the dispute between the two sages? They disagree only in a case where one kills an individual dying from injury caused at the hand of another person, as in the case where 10 people hit him until the last guy put him over the edge. Right? So there are 3 cases. Case number 1 is he's got a wound for which he's definitely going to die in the next 12 months. Certainly exempt. Case number 2 is Hashem made him sick and you hastened his death. Certainly liable because nobody else contributed to his murder but you and God. Now, where is the dispute? So the first case, the guy's considered basically already dead because he's going to die in the next 12 months. Exempt. Second case, What God does is not your business. You hasten the death, liable. That's the third case is when he's almost dead because others almost killed him, and you put him over the edge. Now here you have the dispute. Is taking away partial life considered death or not? So they disagree only in a case where one kills an individual dying from injury caused at the hand of another person. One sage, the rabbis, liken this to the case of a treifa, of a person who's going to die within the next 12 months, and therefore rules that one who kills him is exempt because he's anyways dead, considering none of the people almost killed him. And one sage, Rabbi Huda, likens this to a case of an individual dying from illness caused at the hand of heaven, because he's still alive technically now, and therefore rules that one who kills him is liable. Okay? But the point being that everybody agrees that if he's almost going to die, because he's a treifa, because he has this wound that's definitely going to kill him in the next 12 months, there's no liability. Right? That's the key he's making here. Clear on this? Yeah? The Gemara asks, as for one who likens this case to the case of a treifa, the person who's going to die within 12 months, what is the reason that he does not liken it to the case of an individual dying from an illness caused at the hand of heaven? Meaning, why choose one over the other? Why would you say that someone who was beaten to death and then the last person actually kills him, why would you say he's more closely linked to someone who's about to die in 12 months? Or why would you compare him more to the one who God made him sick? Like, why would you go one with the other? Right? So says the Gemara answers, in the case of an individual dying from an illness caused at the hand of heaven, no action was performed by a person to kill him. Whereas this case of an individual dying from injury caused at the hand of another person, an action was performed by an individual to kill him. Therefore, it is a case of two people who performed an action together and they're not liable. Now in the reverse, the Gemara asks, and as for the one who likens this to the case of an individual dying from an illness caused at the hand of heaven, what is the reason he's not likened to a treifa? The person is going to die in 12 months. The Gemara answers, in the case of a treifa, his status is like that of one whose organs, the trachea and the esophagus, are cut, who is considered to be slaughtered, even though he's still alive. But if it's already slaughtered, he's slaughtered. The status of this individual dying from an injury caused at the hand of a person is not like that of one whose organs, the trachea and the esophagus, are cut, and there's no particular defect. Rather, he's like one suffering from general frailty, like any frail or elderly individual, and therefore putting him over the edge is considered murder, even though his frailty happens to have come from other people. Yeah. Okay, so we have different ways of thinking about this person, right? The person who was beaten almost to death and then put over the edge by the last person. Do we compare this to someone who is almost dying and therefore has no liability? Or do we compare it to someone who God made sick and old and therefore you are liable? But one thing is clear. If a person got into a car accident and he's about to die and someone went ahead and murdered him, is he liable or not? Nope. He's not liable. So even though it may be forbidden, but he's not liable. If he's not liable, it's a lower level of prohibition. So maybe I'd be allowed to harvest his organs to save the other guy who's definitely going to live for longer. So the logic, which, in other words, the reason why you can't kill someone else in order to save your own life is because who said which blood is redder? Halacha says there is such a thing as redder blood. Someone is about to die, his blood is less red, and the guy who's living will live longer. So maybe I could take his heart. So let's see the language of Rabbi Gershoni, and we'll conclude with that. So again, top of the second page in Rabbi Gershoni's text. So after determining the moment of death, we've already established that the moment of death is only when when the breath stops. So as far as that's concerned, someone who has a beating heart is halachically alive. We've determined that. But now there's another question that comes up. Maybe, even though he's still alive, maybe I'm still allowed to take his heart. Right? Based on the logic we just said. So let's see how Rabbi Gershoni words it. We must determine another new point. Can we save someone who is in certain danger? And only a heart transplant will save him from death. Can that be done al cheshbon, on the account or at the expense of chayesha, of temporary life, shal adam shu b'cheskas treifa, for someone who's in the class of a treifa, in that he's certainly going to die in a very short period of time. The Gemara is at 12 months. In the case of the heart transplant, the guy's dying in 3 minutes. Ba'aroifim, and the doctors kavu, they've established he most certainly will not live. Now, in a case where you're looking at one person who's about to die in a few minutes, and one guy's got the potential to survive for the next 50, 60 years, can the following logic be applied? My chazis. What makes you think that your blood, is more blood? Maybe your blood, maybe your friend's blood is more, maybe your fellow man's blood is more red. But now, maybe that reasoning doesn't apply. Even the treifa bavada yamus potter, because the person here, the donor, is about to die. He's certainly going to die. And halacha is, if you kill someone who's certainly going to die, you are exempt. You're not liable for the murder. As the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin, page 78, which we just finished reading. And therefore, perhaps it's permitted to save one man through transplant of the heart. That this person should live a normal life, that is viable and sustainable. And the logic of who's to determine which blood is more red doesn't apply here, because I can determine which blood is more red. Because someone who's a treifa, someone who his life is going to end in a short period of time, in many regards, is not considered alive. The gavra katzila kotel, you killed a dead man. Right? So if the problem was that as long as the heart is beating, he's alive, that's true if we're talking about saving his life. But if we're talking about using his life to save somebody else's life, and I take out his heart, even though it's a murder, but I'm exempt from this murder because I murdered a dead man. Even by halacha, he's considered a dead man.
He was on his way out anyway.
That's right. And therefore, maybe his blood is, quote, less red. Ulafizan, based on this logic, you'd be allowed to remove one of the limbs of the person who's about to die, in order to save his friend. The lishtal boy, and to put in him a heart, so that he can live a viable life. Again, as I mentioned, you can see the holes in the argument already, because murder is murder. And we're God to decide who lives longer, right? Which comes to the next question.
This lashon that they just used in the last sentence,
yeah,
is reminds of Aver Minachai.
We'll get to that. What? It's the same words. I mean, we're talking about
taking
a limb from a living person.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not a living animal, but a living person.
Yeah, no, you're right. Taking a limb from a living person. But so that would be the argument to say no. In other words, so let's do it again. So let's go both ways. The argument to say you may not do a heart transplant is based on the fact that as long as there's a beating heart is alive.
Right.
The argument to say yes is because someone who's about to die, I'm allowed to end his life early to save somebody else.
Right.
Because there's, quote, exemption from liability. Right. Even though, as we're going to learn soon, perhaps next time, that even if it's exemption, there's still a serious prohibition. So it's not such, it's on shaky grounds, this argument, but at least this is where this argument. But this is the more important argument. Who's to decide a guy's about to die? Who's the one that can make that call? Who makes the call and says, this is not a viable life, we're taking his heart? Who's allowed to make such a determination? And this is about to say, there's something else we have to determine here. If, according to Jewish law, we rely with respect to this serious situation of potential murder, in order to determine what's considered a non-viable life, does Torah say, because the doctor says he's going to die in 5 minutes, therefore Torah says, yes, he's definitely going to die in 5 minutes? Maybe God's going to make him live for much longer. Who said we give that determination to the doctor's guess? Especially at the risk of murdering someone.
Yeah. Sounds like what they're saying here is like, you can't just go and cut anybody from Maimonides and be like, all right.
Exactly. Exactly. You can't do that, right? You certainly can't. Just because the doctor says doesn't X amount of time. Who said that Torah law and morality goes by the doctor's estimation? Right? Oi, she said, with the laws of treifa by an animal, that is an animal who has an illness from which he will not recover, and even if this animal is ritually slaughtered and it's a kosher animal otherwise, it's still considered forbidden to eat because at the moment of death it was not viable because it had one of these injuries for which it will die within the next 12 months. The Torah lists, not the Torah, I'm sorry, the oral tradition, the Gemara lists 18 such injuries. Now the halacha is like this, and we're going to learn this more clearly soon. The halacha is like this. Even if modern science comes along and says that we've determined that a cow will live for longer than 12 months, even if it has one of these 18 sicknesses that the Mishnah listed as a treifa. Says the halacha, too bad. We have by tradition from Moses that this constitutes a treifa, and therefore the animal is not kosher. Even if the doctor says it's viable for the next 10 years. Because we don't go by the doctor's determination, we go by what Torah says is considered viable or not viable, or what Torah is considered treifa. Now the question is, does that same principle apply to humans? Right. Do we take the doctor's word for it that he's going to die, or do we go by Torah's word for it? And Torah's word for it is, stand back, you're about to murder someone who's alive.
Similar to what you're saying here is like, let's say that this cow that has scars on its lung is a perfectly healthy cow. It can live for very many years.
Yeah.
It's still a treifa.
It's correct. But so that's right. And does that apply to a human? Right. Or by humans, we go by the doctor's determination. So we're still in limbo here.
Animals aren't humans.
Oh, the question is, how does Torah view it?
Right.
Does Torah determine that this person is not viable, or does Torah say let the doctor decide if he's viable or not? And even if we're of the view he's viable, let's say Torah determines he isn't viable. Are you allowed to kill a non-viable person to save someone else? Just because you told me earlier that you're not liable, therefore means you're allowed to? Just because we can't try you in court for murder means you're allowed to? Right? That's another question. He was arguing that because you're exempt from murdering someone who's about to die, therefore maybe his blood is less red. So in your view then, Rabbi Gershoni,
no,
you just because you can't be tried in court and held for capital punishment, therefore you're allowed to? Not necessarily. Rabbi Gershoni is saying maybe I am allowed to. So we're in a limbo here, right? But those who are permissive will rely on this principle, that because we determined this person to die, and even though it's considered an act of murder by taking out the heart, I murdered a dead man, and I'm allowed to murder a dead man to save someone else. This is the argument they would make. Whereas those who say you're not allowed to just say, hey, it's murder, period, end of story. This is essentially the two camps. The majority of halachic authorities are on the side of it's murder and don't do it.
I think there's a difference though between, let's say, some 100-year-old on the cocker that who's still doing his thing,
yeah,
and a 50-year-old guy who's, probably not going to make it in the hospital.
Well, we're not talking about age at all. Right, we're talking about doctor's determination on is he going to die in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You don't even need to see a doctor. A guy comes in from a car accident,
right,
and his skull is completely crushed,
right,
but he technically is still breathing. His heart's still pumping.
Right.
It's a question of 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, but his heart's going to stop soon. Right. So it's not like I mean, God can do whatever he wants, but
right.
As far as nature goes, this guy's not making it for 20 minutes.
Right.
Right. So am I allowed to murder him for the sake of saving someone else? Does that count as murdering? Am I allowed to murder a dead man?
Right.
Right. The age is not the issue.
Right.
Right. The issue is, does medicine determine that he's going to die? Or let's rephrase that. Does halacha determine A, that he's going to die? And B, does halacha allow you to kill someone who's going to die? Right? Or just because he's going to die doesn't make it not murder, and if he may not. This is the issue that's being straddled by all of the halachic analysis. Clear? So we've laid our foundation very well, and God willing, next week I'm not going to be here. My brother's wedding, thank God. But 2 weeks out we will continue, God willing. We have a lot more to cover, but this is the foundation. This is the building blocks, and we're going to build more and more. We're going to come up with very interesting scenarios and very interesting stories and very interesting angles on the question of viability, on the question of the moment of death, and risk reward analysis in medicine. Risking murder versus saving life. It's a very, very weighty question, as I mentioned at the beginning. And I remind you again, please do not behave in accordance to what you learn here. Talk to your local Orthodox rabbi. This is purely an exercise in academia. just for the sake of knowing. Okay, wonderful night, everybody. God willing, 2 weeks we continue.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.